Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Good evening, everybody. Hey, Chris. Hey, Martin. And Rodney. Evening, everybody. Come on in. Welcome to Effing Chicago. Been too long as I did an effing program. Good week for us. There's a lot of people in the news acting like assholes. I'm happy to say it. Not that I don't on Mysterious Chicago. Hey, Jafer. Hey, Gladys. Evening, Dina. Hey, Katie and Sarah. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Javier, we are going to talk about H.H. Holmes. Hey, Betsy and Kathleen. We're on Effing Chicago today, so I'll swear a bit more. Hey, Cindy in Detroit. Detroit. Hey, Toby. Evening, Emily. Hey, Casey. Evening, Jordana and Timothy. Hey, Darlene in Kenosha. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Larry. You know, I almost wore a Mars Cheese Castle shirt to this thing. Hey, Jennifer. The YouTube numbers are starting to pick up a little bit. They had nowhere to go but up. Hey, Karen. Hey, Rose. Javier. No, I do not have any evidence that H.H. Holmes was a cannibal. Hey, Ann. Hey, Betsy. This is the kind of thing they might say about him around Halloween. You know who was a cannibal was John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. He ate several people's bones. They leave it out of most of the songs. But if you go back to like the early versions. Hey, Nancy. I gotta be careful saying shit like that. People tend to think I'm telling the truth. Evening, Nancy and Julianne. Hey, Tracy. Nancy in Denver. Hey, Cindy. Me, Adam? Yes, Rodney. Hey, Kathy in Oak Ridge. Hey, Susan. Evening, Debbie. Hey, everybody. 6 inches of rain, that's rough. We got a little bit today, not as much as we were supposed to, I don't think. Evening, Melissa. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, Kathy, the school group yesterday was a one-day job. Hey, Denise and Melissa, but I'll be with another group for 4 days next week. But we should have a good Find a Grave Friday in New York. Hello, Denise and Patty. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Nancy. We got a lot of Nancys out here tonight. Now I want some cheese, damn. What do I do with the kids for 4 days? It's New York, there's plenty of stuff to do. It's a good thing, too, because the schedule they gave me is very wide open. Hey, Joanne, hey, Candy in Minnesota. Hey, Eileen and Priya. Hey, Lynn, it'll be under youtube.com/Adam Seltzer. All right, Bob. Yeah, Rose, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey. There's a lot of Nancy's in songs, especially murder ballads. Girls in murder ballads tend to be named Polly or Nancy. Hey, Betty in Canada. Hey, Kristen, yeah, Find a Grave is a go tomorrow. And then next week it'll be in New York. Hey, Napur in St. Louis. Hey, Barbara. Telling all the miracle the day you came along. Hey, Bob. I love you with all my heart. Hey, Cynthia in Florida. Yeah, hey, Kristen. Hey, Ann and Gregory. Pop on in, everybody. Come on, come inside. It's fun inside. Hey, Susan. Hey, Christine. Hey, David. Hey, Liz in Indiana. All right, Bob, good to hear. Kids to the Taylor Swift song. With most of my school groups, they start singing Taylor Swift songs on the bus eventually, but it's almost always old school Taylor. They never do one off her last 3 albums, which I think are by far her best work. But maybe it's just because I'm old. I like her stuff about being an adult better than her stuff about being a teenager, I guess. Evening, Sarah. Yeah, Joanne, it's usually Mandy and Layla doing Effing Chicago, but I thought I'd just pop in. I thought I'd do one once in a while. Hey, Robin and Animal Kingdom. I'm going to turn it down. You don't want to have this. The kind of language we're going to be busting out tonight doesn't work in the happiest place on earth. Holmes was not a Disney villain. He did have the Captain Hook mustache going, though. Just trying to imagine, what if Hans Conried did the H.H. Holmes voice? I was born with the devil in me. Holmes never really said that, but still. And then Sherlock and Eleanor. Hey, Robbie in Tennessee. We got a lot of Tennesseans here tonight. Hey, Robin and Sal. Well, the mustache didn't so much vanish as disintegrate, as tends to happen when you open a grave. We'll give it a couple more minutes for people to log on. We'll let Benny Goodman do one more tune. He does also kind of have the outfit of Edgar, the bad guy, and the butler in Aristocats. I feel like Nashville is, there's almost like a battle going on there between displaced New Yorkers and bachelorette parties these days. Hey John, welcome along. You know, I actually heard a good line about Neil Diamond. There's a Twitter user, Eat the Document. Her name is Julia. She's a big Bob Dylan fan, a college student, and she's a lot of fun on Twitter, but lately she posted about Neil Diamond's Brother Loves Traveling Salvation show. Because this is effing Chicago, I can say her remark was, say what you will about Neil Diamond, he put his whole pussy into this song. Evening, everybody. John, that'd be the Shadow Man in Princess and the Frog. Hey, Phoenix. And Lori. Everybody, welcome to Effing Chicago. I know it says mysterious up there, but we're doing it on Effing Chicago tonight. One day I'll learn which way to point. I just can't. I never point in the right thing. I'd make a lousy weatherman. I'd be like, hurricane coming in from over here, and I'm trying to point at Florida, and really I'm pointing at, like, Saskatchewan. Letting Benny Goodman finish up another tune before we get started properly. People tend to log in right at 8 o'clock. Alright, that's Benny wrapping it on up. So, alright. That means it is time to get going. Alright, welcome everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Effing Chicago Tours tonight. Normally I'm with Mysterious Chicago. Tonight I'm doing this one for Effing Chicago. For those of you who may not know, here's your warning. Effing Chicago is a collective of professional Chicago tour guides behaving badly. When we're working under the Effing Chicago banner, we are allowed to dress however we want. I can just wear a Bart Simpson shirt instead of one of my usual button-downs. We can swear all we want. We can go ahead and, most of the corporate rules have, don't say anything remotely political. Around here I can say Greg Abbott is a total fuckwinkle. I can say Donald Trump is a dumb shit. I can say that mayor in Texas is a spiny lump sucker. Nobody's gonna fucking stop me. We can say whatever the fuck we want around here. So alright everybody, welcome along. So today we are going to be talking about, let me give you some of my credentials before I get started. Effing Chicago, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Adam Seltzer, author of such books as Mysterious Chicago, the book, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, I Kissed a Zombie and I Liked It, which they would not let me title Dead Guys Have No Reason to Live, though I really, really wanted to. Murder Maps USA, new from Thames and Hudson, featuring some H.H. Holmes content. Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, coming in August from University of Illinois Press, also featuring some H.H. Holmes content. The founder of Graceland Cemetery was perhaps Holmes' biggest individual single swindling victim. And most notably for tonight, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, a book about H.H. Holmes that is this fucking thick. For those of you not familiar with spiny lumpsuckers, spiny lumpsucker is a really ugly fish that really sucks at swimming. Just let that sink in for a second. A fish that sucks at swimming. It's like when you become a mayor of a small town so you can play cowboy, then you find yourself in completely in over your head. I'm also on several H.H. Holmes TV shows, most notably perhaps American Ripper, a rather silly show about trying to prove that H.H. Holmes may have also been Jack the Ripper. I gave them all the documents showing that he was in Chicago and New Hampshire during the time of the Ripper murders, but they had 8 episodes to fill. What could we say? So, for those of you not quite familiar, H.H. Holmes is a guy we generally refer to as America's first serial killer. If you're a longtime watcher of Mysterious Chicago, you know he wasn't even really the first serial killer in Chicago, let alone the United States, but it's just good marketing. So I'll give some of the basic recap. March of 1893, the Chicago Tribune published this article, Hid in Secret Rooms. Mr. Holmes purchases it, takes it to his World's Fair Hotel on 63rd Street and neglects to settle. This really is Holmes' basic MO right here. He would buy stuff on credit and then not pay for it. He did this over and over again. This is March of 1893, a couple of months from the opening of the World's Fair. He had added a third floor onto his building down on 63rd Street, which would have looked like this a little bit later. This is with an unsightly temporary roof added on top after he tried to torch the place for insurance money, as was his wont. But he was in the process of pretending he was furnishing the new third floor to become a hotel space. Really, it was never a hotel. He never intended it to be a hotel. He was just buying up stuff on credit and then not paying for it until he could sell it for cash. But here's the man himself with the... Well, you gotta give him this. It's a hell of a mustache, especially for a mugshot. The guy had been on the road for a while. But about a year and a half after this came out, after this he drifted around the country for a little while. November of 1894, a year and a half later, he was arrested in Boston on suspicion of having faked his best friend's death in Philadelphia to swindle an insurance company. And this was a really big deal for about 9 days or so. He was a 9 days wonder in the paper about this magnificent insurance swindler. But it wasn't until the next year that they realized he had also killed a couple of this guy's children. At that point, people started telling all kinds of stories about this building. They started calling it the Castle, his building down on 63rd Street in Chicago. The New York World put out this article, this map with rooms like the Room of the Three Corpses, the Black Closet, the Maze, the Asphyxiation Chamber. Some of this was based on actual reporting, not their own, all secondhand. Others just really came out of their imagination. So the story of H.H. Holmes grew and grew from there, and over time the legend kind of replaced the fact, as tends to happen. There's a thing called the Roswell effect. When a big story comes out and then gets debunked, sometimes it goes underground for a couple of generations. Then when it comes back out, not only do people forget that a lot of it was debunked, but it's also added a whole bunch of other shit around it. So I've been researching Holmes for over 10 years now, and this is a matter of trying to get everything back to the primary sources, trying to find the best data that I can. This means spending a lot of time digging around on microfilm. More and more papers have been digitized now, but there's still a lot of gems buried here. Here's one from the Chicago Daily News towards the middle of the investigation of the Holmes building, when they realized that the police were just kind of talking out of their ass the whole time. But a lot more I do at the legal archives. Well, I got a lot more good stuff out of there. It's harder to do now. They don't let you get as many cases as you want anymore, and it takes a lot longer. But for a while, it was kind of open season in there. So this is what they have at the legal archives. When you go into the building, it's a whole bunch of microfilm reels listing off all of the various paperwork cases. Like here you can see H.H. Holmes in lawsuits against Frederick Schultz, against E. Smith, an investor, French and Potter Crockery Company. These are just some of the ones under his own name. Sometimes it's also under his company name or one of his friends' names or one of his various aliases. So really, I had to take up lawsuits against all the people that he knew, all the other names that he went by, all of his known business associates, his various lawyers, and a lot of times it would actually turn out they really were suing one of his friends. But other times it was him, and from what I could tell, he got sued about 60 times while he was in Chicago. That's an average of about once a month while he was in town. So what you do there is you fill out the form with the number that you see over on the left and a couple other figures that you can't see in the cutoff frame here. And then a few weeks later, they bring you the paperwork. And it's not always this much shit. Sometimes it's just like an envelope with a summons in it, but every now and then you'll get like piles and piles of this crumbling old Victorian paperwork. And digging around in this, you can get some really reliable data about where Holmes was at any given time. So sometimes you have to really do some deciphering. This is a lawsuit over stealing barbershop equipment. It's really hard to read this shit sometimes. Even if you know how to learn cursive. I was among maybe the last generation and a half that learned to read cursive in school. We spent an inordinate amount of time learning cursive in school. I still occasionally use it for shit like this, but this is not the Danielian style cursive we were taught. But also you'll find things like the architect's original diagram for the first floor front of the castle building. It's even got it right up there, H.H. Holmes, 63rd and Wallace Street, Englewood. You could about make a poster out of this. Only you have to be an architect to kind of know what you're looking at here. But what I found in all of these years of digging through his crap is that a lot of what we think of the story is really stuff that grew up over the years. Like, for years and years, if you wanted to find out anything about H.H. Holmes, about the only source you could probably access was Herbert Asbury's Gangs of Chicago, which was originally published as The Gem of the Prairie, then as the Chicago Underworld. He's also the guy who wrote Gangs of New York, and similarly made up an awful lot of New York folklore. Both Chicago and New York, a lot of the folklore you can really only trace back to this guy's stuff. He wrote these really wildly entertaining compendiums of local legends and local crime stories, but freely admitted that he liked to make shit up. People just liked to hear that their towns were wretched hives of scum and villainy. Much of what we think of with Holmes, like the story about them finding torture equipment down in the basement, only really goes back to Herbert Asbury. A lot of the stories about skeletons they found there were reports of it. He made it seem like it was much more clearly like boxes of bones and actual human skeletons. His sources were generally not good. Some of them a lot of it came from the New York World, which did not have a reporter on the ground in Chicago. Some came from Holmes' confession, which was total bullshit, and some just came out of his own imagination. But let's back up. We'll talk about young Holmes. This is his house, which is miraculously still standing in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Most of what we know about his childhood comes from interviews with his neighbors, all of whom pointed out that he was cross-eyed, this being the old days, and his autobiography, Holmes' Own Story, which you can almost tell which parts he really wrote and which parts he didn't. The parts that he wrote are boring as hell. There's strong evidence that the editor really punched it up before it got published. The most famous story is a story that when he was a kid, some boys pushed him into the doctor's office and he saw a skeleton. It's not in the early drafts. It's probably written by the editor, but he did work for a doctor, Dr. Nahum White, and would in fact have learned quite a bit of anatomy. Dr. Nahum White was a known advocate of human dissection, at a time when it wasn't even legal to be so. He was noted for his collection of morbid anatomical specimens. A skeleton would have been the least of the shit this guy had. So when Holmes was 17, he married Clara Levering. They had a son together, and he moved off to Ann Arbor so he could go to medical school at the University of Michigan. Clara and Robert, the baby, lived with him for a while, but neighbors said that they would see Clara walking around with black eyes, and eventually she said, fuck this, moved back to New Hampshire. Holmes only saw them a couple times more after that. He did see them again, but not very often. So he changed his name probably a couple of times, spent a couple of years after medical school, and he graduated. A couple of his professors just said they graduated him out of pity. Just what you want to hear about your doctor. Then spent a couple of years bumming around upstate New York and Minnesota, where he met Myrta Zutik Belknap. There's a couple of drawings of photos of her, but not a lot that have survived. About the closest is one really murky photo that I think I have down over here. Yeah, that's not it. That's it. Only photo of Myrta, his wife. So, at some point, he did actually take out the paperwork to try to divorce Clara. He said that she was cheating on him and actually named names in the paperwork. The names could not be verified of being a real person in Ann Arbor at the time. The last name tracks. But she never responded to it. The suit never went through, but Holmes married her under the name of H.H. Holmes, a name that he started using in 1886. You tend to hear that he got it from Sherlock Holmes, but he was using it at least 6 months before the first Sherlock Holmes story went around. I've still had people say, well, maybe he saw an early copy. Come on, you're a fucking adult. All right, so he eventually built her house for this place, her house in Wilmette. She's a whole other story. So perhaps the most famous story of him coming to Chicago is he got a job in Dr. Holton's pharmacy. And the way this story is always told, they always say that Mrs. Holton was trying to run the place while her poor husband was dying of prostate cancer upstairs. And she didn't know what she was doing, so she was only too happy to hire this energetic young go-getter H.H. Holmes. That's basically bullshit. This was invented by Herbert Asbury. Newspapers of the day mention a Mrs. Dr. Holton, and they mentioned that she had trouble getting some money from the pharmacy for Holmes. They always like to say that he killed them both or they went off to California. They are, in fact, both alive. This is Oakwood Cemetery. We'll be seeing some more tomorrow. That's kind of a giveaway for what I'm planning for Find a Grave Friday. They're often said to have disappeared. They weren't even an old woman and a young man and her husband, the doctor. It was a young woman and a young woman who was the doctor. Her husband had some kind of job on the railway, and they both survived well into the 20th century. Here's my selfie at their graves. Herbert Asbury made that one up. But Holmes bought the pharmacy from her. Not entirely fair and square. It took her forever to actually get the money, but she did eventually get it. And Holmes then embarked on a life of crime. He'd already done a little bit of swindling in upstate New York, but it was while he was working in the pharmacy and rounding the pharmacy that this suit came up. He had bought a bunch of barbershop equipment, never paid for it. The guy tried to repossess it all by himself, which wasn't actually legal. I think Holmes ended up getting to keep that stuff. But then, early 1887, he bought the land across the street from the pharmacy to build the building we would come to know as the Castle. Now, construction started in fall of 1887. Holmes transferred the ownership to his mother-in-law, Lucy Belknap, so if anybody got sued, it would be her, and people would be sued. He hired Etna Iron and Steel and an architect named Edward Galauner to do the architecture for it. And it's all really well documented. You tend to hear that Holmes designed it all himself so nobody else would know what was inside of the place. Well, no, we know who designed it. We've got records of who did all of the building and how much they were all paid. And the workers were actually paid. It was just the people working for the people who were paying them never got paid. Their bosses never got paid. But this is what he built. It wouldn't have looked quite like this. It would have been a 2-story building initially, and this is, again, the post-fire version with the fake summons on top. Now, there were a lot of people invested in this financially. It wasn't something that he did all by himself. He had investors all over the neighborhood, and eventually everybody was suing him, so he had a lot of mechanics liens on the place. Now, by 1893, there were a lot of people with a financial interest. When it was auctioned into receivership, this is one of the summons. Usually a court summons will say, we command you to summon so-and-so. Usually just as like a witness or something. In this case, you've got name after name. Some of these people are dead by the time this went out. But this is page 1 of 3. Campbell Yates Co., Emery Moore. Okay, not Emery A. Store. That would have been a whole other twist that I didn't see coming. I'm still finding out stuff about guys on this list. Julia L. Connor, right below my head right here. She was dead by then. But this apparently had gone around a few times before. It's one of my favorite little things that I found in the archives. Is right where it says we command you to summon, right above that you can see some poor clerk had to write in, again. Amuses me to no end. So that occupied him through 1887. 1888, because people ask about the Jack the Ripper thing, whether he could have been in London committing the Jack the Ripper murders. Well, here's what we know. October 1888, he registered to vote. During that whole time, September and October, he was dealing with the lawsuit of Etna Iron and Steel. In particular, the architects filed a thing. He had to file a thing back. That would have kept him occupied in late September. Later on, his Georgiana Yoke, not Georgiana Clare, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but there was an article where they talked to his family back in New Hampshire, and he said he had come to visit them in November of 1888. This also clears up a little bit. He registered to vote in October, but didn't vote on Election Day because he had gone to New Hampshire. That gets him a bit closer to London, but not close enough that he could have actually stabbed anybody. That was the last time they saw him in 1888, up until 1894 when he was on the run and stopped back in. But 1889, a guy came into the castle looking for work by the name of Ned Connor. Now, Ned Connor came in while Holmes was getting a shave and a haircut. He was sitting in the barber chair just talking to him in the mirror, then finally spun around and dramatically said, "All right, you're hired." The guy had style, I'll give him that. Well, sometimes he did. Other times he acted like a spiny lumpsucker. This is Julia Connor, his wife. who was probably the driving force getting him to move out of Iowa and into the big city. And this is their daughter, Pearl, who would have been 4 years old at the time. So he put Julia to work. He promptly started having an affair with Julia. He had just married Myrta. Myrta had just had a baby named Lucy herself. It seems like everybody in the neighborhood, except possibly Myrta, knew about the affair with Julia. Ned sure as hell knew. And Holmes would even rub it into him. One time he came to talk to him after the two of them had split up, and he was talking about Julia and mentioned something that he wouldn't have known unless he had been sleeping with her. We have to use our imaginations on what exactly he said, but that's what he told the cops later on. Now, Christmas of 1891, a couple of years into this affair, Julia and Pearl were supposed to show up in Davenport, Iowa for Julia's sister's wedding, and they never showed. Holmes started going around to Ned saying, "Hey, Ned, do you know where Julia went?" He started writing letters to Julia's father saying, "Hey, Julia doesn't work for me anymore, but I need her to fill out some paperwork. Could you forward something on to her?" All of this was just covering his own ass, because most likely they had both been killed. Now, one thing Holmes was fairly consistent on, he issued several different confessions and said different things to different people at different times. One thing he was fairly consistent on was saying that Julia had died during what was then an illegal abortion. He never really said what happened to Pearl most likely would have killed her with poison. Now, it's entirely possible that he didn't mean to kill Julia. He had just knocked her up and decided to perform an abortion and just sucked at it. That's entirely possible. He did tell one of his lawyers that he had killed Julia. It makes more sense to me to imagine that he had said, "Yes, she died while I was performing an abortion on her," than him just outright saying, "Yes, I murdered her." That particular lawyer, anyway. One of his lawyers he probably could have said that to. The one in this case was a little more on the level than that. Slightly more on the level than that. So with Julia having disappeared in Christmas of 1891, May of that year, Holmes took up with Emmeline Cigrand, of whom there was no confirmed photograph, just a lot of drawings of photographs that used to exist. So she was having an affair with somebody. We know this from what she told her friends. She said she was engaged to somebody, but she always gave a different name. Most likely this would have been Holmes, and the impression I get is that she was just trying to be secretive because she knew about Myrta. She knew Myrta was still around and Holmes was married to her, but thought that she was dying up someplace in Wilmette. At the time she was Myrta was mostly living in a boarding house in Wilmette at the time. Their house hadn't been built there yet. And Holmes apparently told her, "Yes, my wife is very, very sick, but one day she'll die, then you and I will get married and we'll live in a big house on Otteray Street." So it was while she was working for him that Holmes added a third floor onto his building that he said was going to be a hotel space for the upcoming World's Fair. This was a swindling operation from the start. Everybody was planning to get rich off of this shit in Chicago. Like, I was living in Atlanta in '96 during the Olympics. It seemed like everybody had a get-rich-quick scheme for this. There were all these legends about, like, people renting someone's house for $1 million, putting in a pool just because they wanted a pool for the 2 weeks they were going to be there. Shit like that. And the same thing was true in Chicago at the time. Holmes took advantage of this. He knew that everybody was going to be really, really free with credit, so he typed up letters like this one. This one is to Bliss, Bullard & Gormley, a hardware company. He says, "Dear sirs, please deliver to H.H. Holmes Hardware for 701 and 763rd Street, in which I will guarantee the payment of as owner of the building. Yours truly, H.S. Campbell." So earlier I was trying to do like the Hans Conried voice. "Gentlemen, please deliver on to H.H. Holmes Hardware for 701 and 703 63rd Street, of which I will guarantee payment as owner of the building. Yours truly, H.S. Campbell." There was no H.S. Campbell. That was just an H.H. Holmes alias, but they weren't even checking into this shit before they gave him hundreds of dollars worth of hardware on credit. Right below there, you can see the bill should be addressed to H.H. Holmes, 701 63rd. That's Holmes' handwriting right there. I can recognize it pretty well. Below that, in somebody else's handwriting, is an address in Philadelphia of a fruit and candy company. Somebody told me Holmes had some kind of scheme with them that he was trying to, like, invent Gumaco. I'm not quite sure I believe that one. Well, we'll see. I could be persuaded. But he added this third floor onto the building using nothing but stolen materials, and what he added was not exactly habitable. You couldn't actually live in the place very well. It was never actually furnished. It wasn't a whole lot better than a papier-mâché facade. It was just there to show investors, see, I'm doing something. But then some doors were wallpapered over. There was hidden stuff that he had bought on credit and not sold yet, hidden all over the place. So Emmeline disappeared in December of 1892. Again, Holmes was fairly consistent in saying that she had died during an abortion. A month or so later, a woman named Minnie Williams moved to town. We actually have a photograph of her. Now, Holmes hired her through an employment agency. She came to work at the castle for a while. You get really weird mixed reports of what she was like. Some people say that Holmes seemed like he was kind of afraid of her. Some people say that she worked there but acted like she didn't. The impression I get is she thought she was using Holmes. She definitely knew more about the swindling than some of the other people. She might have thought that she was using him to get money to relaunch her acting career. But they seem to have been living as husband and wife. They even rented a place up on the north side and brought in Minnie's estranged kid sister, Nanny. They had been orphaned at a young age. They were raised by separate guardians. By some accounts, Minnie didn't even remember that she had a baby sister until they were reunited at a judge's house as teenagers. Sorry. But she moved in with them, wrote a letter back to her aunt saying, pretty soon, we've been to the fair, and pretty soon we're going to go off to Europe, and I'm so happy. It's an awfully convenient letter to have written. Once again, there were used to be more pictures of Minnie. Some of these could still surface at some point. Like there's this one picture, this is from a program of a thing at the conservatory in Boston that she performed at. Looks about like her to me. This is a tableau performing Envy. She was in the show. We don't know for sure that this was her, but the pieces line up. We got better provenance on it than most other pictures. You know, people send me pictures all the time that they say are lost pictures of Holmes, and it's just some dude in a mustache. Sometimes it's got the guy's name and address written on the back of it, and it's not a place Holmes was ever close to. But these two disappeared in July of 1893. There were sporadic sightings of Minnie thereafter, and the thing is, when Holmes was captured, he was very quick to say, oh yes, Nanny Williams is dead, I helped get rid of the body. But Minnie is the one who killed her. Now, this was something he tried to lay out clumsily, and he eventually got his act together on it, but not until it was way too late. His whole idea was, so Minnie was really mad at me that I was dating someone else, so she went and dated another guy, then started killing people. And but she got so freaked out after she killed her sister that she wanted to make sure people thought it was me and not her. So if there's any other dead bodies, that was definitely her. She just made it look like it was me. This fooled exactly nobody, of course. So about 6 weeks after they disappeared, strangely enough, there was a big fire at the castle building that wrecked the third floor. Coincidentally, Holmes had taken out 4 or 5 insurance policies on the place. The insurance companies were not fooled for 1 second. Holmes then had to spend the rest of 1893 just kind of popping around. He had a brand new house in Wilmette that still stood until the 1990s. If he was there a month, it's as much as he was. He was hopping around through various hotels around the North Side, Lincoln Park area, just trying to stay ahead of the insurance companies. Meanwhile, he was also dating yet another person, Georgiana Yoke, who knew him under the name of Henry Mansfield Howard. He told her that was his uncle's name. He had taken his uncle's name in order to be his heir. Somehow this didn't strike her as a red flag. We don't have a photograph of Georgiana for sure either. There's a group photo from when she was older that she's probably in, but we just have a bunch of drawings of her. But there are a number of drawings. She ended up appearing at the trial. She was generally said to be the prettiest of his wives. They seem to have bonded over trouble with their eyes. She had a goiter that made it look like her eyes were bugging out. He himself suffers from strabismus. One of his eyes was crooked. We would call it cross-eyed was the old-fashioned term for it. And every neighbor that talked to the press said, I knew I couldn't trust that guy because he never looked at me directly in the eye. And this was confirmed by a couple of different doctors. This may have been what they bonded over. But when Holmes left town, he took Georgiana with him. They first went to Denver to pick up some money that Minnie Williams was owed upon the death of her brother in a mining accident. They got married while they were in Denver, then moved on to Texas, along with his friend Benjamin Peitzel. He and Peitzel had been working in the same building in Chicago some years before, apparently found out they had a shared love for dishonest business practices. Fall of 1893, he got in a lot of trouble for passing bad checks in Indiana. Holmes got him out of trouble and apparently said something to the effect of, "All right, Ben, you owe me now, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to go to that life insurance place that's right next to the building where we both used to have offices. We are going to take out a $10,000 policy on your life, and then when it matures, we'll go to Philadelphia and we'll fake your death. We'll find a dead body that looks like you and we'll say it was you, take that $10,000 and live like kings. Damn hell-ass kings." Having worked with with Holmes for a long time, you'd think Peitzel would have known better than this. But they had to wait for the policy to mature, so first they went down to Texas to build on some land that Minnie Williams had strangely enough sold to H.H. Holmes for $1, right around the time she disappeared. And they ended up using the same basic scheme as he had used in Chicago, buying stuff on credit and not paying for it and having no intention of paying for it, and built a building that was very similar to the castle, only larger. And there is a diagram of this place. I don't know if he ever even set foot inside of the finished building. He got in some trouble for swindling there and had to leave pretty quick. But the inside of it was really weirdly set up as well. It was designed like the kind of building you would design if you had never actually designed a building before and knew nothing about it. This one, more so than the Chicago one, he probably did actually design by himself. But he never quite used it. It sat there empty for years and years before somebody finally developed it and put offices and stuff. And now it's long gone now. I think it went down in about the 1920s. But having been chased out of Texas, Holmes ended up in St. Louis, where he started a drugstore and promptly started buying shit on credit and not paying for it. He swindled such companies as Hennessy Cognac. I should really get them to pay me to say that. But he was caught right away and put in jail, where he shared a cell with a guy named Marion Hedgepeth. Now here's the thing, we gotta go back to the Texas thing for a second. Holmes went down to Texas and started operating under the name Mr. Howard, Jesse James's old nickname. He got involved in some horse swindles. He told his wife that they had to use different names because there was some squatters on his uncle's land and they were going to come kill him if they knew he was in town. It's like he had decided to become a Wild West outlaw. Borrowed Jesse James's old alias. Then he ends up in jail with Marion Hedgepeth, who robbed the Glendale train. Holmes had borrowed Jesse James's name. This guy robbed the same fucking train as Jesse James. Holmes was completely starstruck. And he stuck up his conversation with him and said, "I got this plan. We're going to fake my friend's death and get a whole bunch of money. We're going to escape to Europe. You want me to use some of the money to get you out of jail? Then you can come to Europe with us?" And Hedgepeth was like, "Yeah, they're there. When Holmes got out of jail, Marion Hedgepeth wrote a letter to the insurance company saying, I think this guy gave me this whole plan. He ain't going to fake his death. He's going to kill his friend. I'm pretty sure of it." Now, Holmes might have at one point actually been planning to fake Peitzel's death, but somewhere along the line he decided to get rid of him. Interesting thing, when Holmes was yanked off the train to be arrested in St. Louis, it was reported Mrs. Howard was attired in the height of fashion, and her diamonds were sufficiently brilliant to attract the attention of the crowd of crooks that usually loaf around the depot. When Sergeant O'Malley approached the couple and casually mentioned that he was afraid that the proposed trip would have to be postponed, she protested in the most indignant manner. Passengers crowded about the couple and police officers. When her husband was taken away, she became almost hysterical and denounced the arrest as persecution. Incidentally, at least one pair of diamond earrings that she got from H.H. Holmes still survives in a safe deposit box for her it's still in the family. But eventually Holmes got out of jail in Philadelphia. By this time, Peitzel had gone on to Philadelphia, where he rented this house on Callowhill Street. He was set up as a guy who bought and sold patents in the place. Holmes came in one day and killed him with chloroform poisoning, leaving the body there thinking it would be a long time before anybody found it. Didn't count on the fact that inventors who want to get their invention marketed get pretty adamant. Peitzel had been talking to this guy named Eugene who was inventing like saw accessories and saw improvements, all kinds of shit for saws. He's got several patents on the book, and Peitzel had expressed interest in maybe buying. So when this guy showed up, he kept knocking on the doors like, "Can we talk more? Can we talk more? Can we talk more?" Finally busted in and found the dead body. But the body was buried probably sooner than Holmes would have liked in a pauper's grave in Philadelphia. Holmes immediately wrote to the insurance company and said, okay, this guy buried under the name B.F. Perry is actually Ben Peitzel. He's insured under this policy number. You owe his widow $10,000. I'll come to Philadelphia and inspect the body myself. So they dug the body up. It was absolutely disgusting. Holmes confirmed the identity. But the insurance company not only had that letter from Marion Hedgepeth, they also just put two and two together. This guy's a known swindler. He's got a rap sheet as long as your arm in Chicago. So they finally tracked him. He was traveling around with a few of Heitzel's children. Then they caught up with him in Boston and took him to Philadelphia to stand trial just for insurance fraud. And he was in papers all over the place. Even before there was really known to be murder in the case, people were calling him the arch criminal of the century. He was just such a popular swindler. And of course, they remembered this article from 1893, hid in secret rooms, and thought, hey, didn't this guy have some kind of a building in Chicago that was full of hidden rooms and secret passages? Think we ought to investigate that? And then they thought, fuck it. They just kind of forgot about it for a while. They decided not to worry about it. The building was sitting more or less abandoned at the time. After the fire, it was more or less uninhabitable. First floor still had a cigar shop and a candy shop and a restaurant that nobody went to. In the spring of 1895, Holmes was put on trial for insurance fraud and convicted. But the DA sat down and said, okay, so Holmes, we arrested you and you didn't have the kids in your custody anymore. You said that they were off hiding with their father. But on trial, you changed your story. You said that was Benjamin Peitzel's body. He really is dead. It was just a suicide, and you made it look like an accident so that you get the insurance money. So the question now is, where are the kids? And he said, oh, they're with Minnie Williams. She has taken them to London. And apparently they didn't stop to think, wait, the woman you keep saying kills everybody? You let them go to London with a woman that goes around killing people? But he wrote out this whole letter explaining the whole thing and suggesting that maybe they could contact. This is maybe our best example of his handwriting here. He said, well, here's a code. Put this in the New York Herald. She might see that in London. Code is down below there. Now, the New York Herald is hilarious. It's a shit paper. It was a horrible copperhead paper during the Civil War. But the first column of each page was like Craigslist missed connections. It was all secret coded messages and stuff, like Amethyst, letter at the old place. Benny, once more come home to mother, if not be responsible for what will happen. Commodore, Kane Expressed, elevation to show Wednesday. Come then and all will be forgiven. Fat Architect. Some of these are in code, some of them are inside jokes. There's an awful lot of stuff like, the woman in the white gloves on the coach yesterday, I would love to speak with you further. It's a great space for predators. But Holmes put up this ad for Minnie Williams, and the various names that he said were her different aliases, really just says, write to George Graham at once. In Kara City Hall, also write to Massey. Massey was one of her guardians. But nobody quite believed this. Of course, Minnie did not respond. The street that he said she was supposed to be living on was not even a real street in London. So a detective named Frank Geyer was put on the case tracing Holmes' tracks as he had traveled with the kids throughout the fall of 1894, and eventually found the girls buried in a shallow grave underneath in a cellar in Toronto. This is not an actual drawing of the case. He was down in the cellar, was only like 3.5 feet of clearance, so they all would have been like bent over trying to dig. But the people who had been renting the place now said they hadn't gone down there at all because it smelled so bad. And really the point Holmes made later on is, I'm supposed to be this great criminal. Do you really think I would have buried bodies in a rental property and not expected to be caught right away? Frankly, that was a fair point. Now, exactly how he killed them is not known. There was a story that went around that he had put them in a trunk and put a gas line into it. That was what he said in his confession later. But there were no gas lines in the house. More likely, he probably killed them with cyanide. But as soon as it came out that he had killed these kids, then people remembered again that building back in Chicago full of hidden rooms. Go in there, investigate everything. So that's what they did. And this is a drawing of the outside on the Wallace Street side. Oh, this is a drawing. This is a photograph. There's a drawing of the inside of the drugstore. There was probably a photograph of this at one point. It might still be circulating around someplace. It's published in the Chicago Chronicle. Now, there were a couple of diagrams drawn up of the place. These are the ones from the Chicago Times-Herald that are probably the most detailed and drawn by somebody who was actually there. But there's also this one drawn by the Chicago Chronicle. So they went around poking through this place. The new chief of police was a guy named Detective Sergeant John J. Badenoch, who was a flour and feed dealer who got the job as chief of police because the new mayor liked the cut of his jib. He was in way over his head, had no idea what he was doing, was absolutely not trained for anything like this, had no experience in law enforcement or law or anything like that whatsoever. But he put his best guys on it. Detective Sergeant John W. Norton, who would go on to do a lot of great stuff with the Chicago police. He would go on to be a pretty good detective. And Inspector Fitzpatrick, a veteran of the Haymarket Massacre. The workers were massacred. Well, these guys really just spent a couple of weeks digging around in this place saying, we found a rope. Perhaps he was hanging people. We found a buried tank. It's definitely gas for killing people, not heating gas or lighting gas. We found a stove. Maybe he was cremating people in it. Never mind that you couldn't possibly cremate a person in a wood-burning stove. But this is how it would go. They would announce that they had found something, and then the next day they'd have to walk it back and say, wait, never mind. One of the bigger ones is there was a story about a footprint found. There was in this one, it looks like it was down in the cellar. It was really in the wall of a soundproof vault that he had installed in the place. And this is the thing, there's not a photograph of this. There's not even a drawing of it, really. Some people could see a footprint, some people couldn't. Some people said they saw lots of footprints there. But this eventually came up. There is this one drawing that was in the New York World, but they thought it was down in the basement because they had been reading this headline. But newspapers loved this story at first. The Chicago Mail was saying, fiendish, dastard. And for 1895, these are really big font headlines. They didn't usually look like this in 1895. But eventually they started to realize, they're just talking out of their asses here. Like there's this one, red stains on a rope. They debunk the story within their own headline here. Look at this shit. Red stains on a rope. Supposed bloody nooses found in H.H. Holmes' house in a dust-covered chest. The theory is the victims were hanged by the neck. Might be cochineal at that. That's dye. And by the end of July, a couple of weeks into the investigation, you were having headlines like this, laughing at the police. Plenty of talk, but no legal evidence. And the general sense that the police would do better to investigate more, talk less. So as the police were starting to look like laughingstocks, all of a sudden they showed up with the guy saying, all right, we figured out why we can't find the bodies. They've all been sold to medical schools. Here's this guy, Mr. Chappell. He bought the dead bodies and turned them into articulated skeletons. And for a couple of days, the newspapers thought, okay, that sounds like the kind of thing that might be true. Initially, they said the guy's name was Charles Chappell. He still shows up in Holmes' books under the name Charles Chappell. He was really named Myron G. Chappell. There's at least a drawing of what he looked like. But after about 12 hours, they fact-checked the story and realized that it looked like a romance. What really had happened was he had been a skeleton articulator years before. For the last 5 or 6 years, the whole time Holmes had been active, he'd been spending most of his time just, exercising his arm. But he had this one skull that he had never finished making the skeleton on. He painted the skull red and hung it in a tree in his yard, like a regular neighbor. But one of his neighbors got super into the Holmes case, decided maybe that was a Holmes victim, so she called the cops. The cops came to this guy and realized that if they poured enough whiskey down his throat, he would say whatever they told him to. So they trotted him around. They said, yeah, you dig there, you'll find the acid pit. If you dig there, you'll find the bleach pit. And when they dug in one place and found some kind of tank, other people had told him there was a gas tank there. When the newspapers all said they found the acid tank, the next day they also mentioned, oh yeah, there wasn't any acid in there. There was just like a bucket full of gasoline. And where the bleach pit was supposed to be, they didn't find anything at all. But for the most part, most of the papers announced they found the skeletons, but not, oh yeah, never mind. Most people only got the opening of the story, not the follow-up. And then came this article in the New York World. And this is kind of the document for the legend of H.H. Holmes, the Castle of a Modern Bluebeard. Now, it's got this line buried in the side here, talking about how Holmes had a hotel, and the list of people who went to Chicago for the fair and never returned was a long one, and the greater number foul play was suspected. How many of them may have wandered into the H.H. Holmes Hotel and never returned? And the exact paragraph is verbatim in the Herbert Asbury book. It's in Devil in the White City. It's been in practically everything, single-handedly inventing the idea that Holmes was preying on World's Fair victims in a hotel. He had never finished the hotel and opened it for business. The number of people who were in town for the fair and suspected of being killed by him is exactly one, just Nanny Williams. But this was just a New York tabloid spitballing for a page that was buried in the back of their Sunday magazine. But then this got reprinted in the Chicago Tribune a couple of weeks later as just an example of, look how we look in New York right about now. And then it kind of became the foundation document for the urban legend of H.H. Holmes. So here we'll look at the castle a little bit here. Right after that article was published in the Tribune, some not in my backyard type torched the place. Now, it didn't burn the whole place to the ground as is often reported. It was, you can see, here's a picture of it from about 10 years later. They'd had to rebuild the top couple of floors, but the basement and the first floor were still in pretty good shape. This is it in 1938, in fact. You can see a pickup truck parked over to the side, so it's definitely not 1895. Eventually, they tore it down to make way for the Englewood post office. You tend to hear that the post office is right in the same place, or even that it was the same building. But these are a couple of Sanborn fire insurance maps juxtaposed over each other. You can see in the blue, that's the castle. The other one is the post office. There's a little bit of overlap, but not much. You'll also notice the building was not that big. It tends to be portrayed as this grand, castle-like structure. It was not all that big. But here's kind of a look at how it would have looked, the exact space. And here's me down in the basement. There is this tunnel down in the basement that roughly lines up with where the thing would have been. And while I was down there, I did have this, I know everybody wants to hear the voice. While I was down there the first time, I started whispering into an audio recorder. Just because I knew I was the envy of every ghost hunter in the world at the time. So I didn't hear anything while I was down there. When I played the recording back, there's this voice like a little girl singing. See if you guys can hear this. Spooky, huh? I'll let that go one more time. Now, it sounds to me like she's saying, sorry, Beefalo. Probably the worst fucking Chef Boyardee product of all time. Other people have suggested, where did she go? Stabbed me in the throat. Why did she go? Or Barry Manilow. Here you go. Anybody we don't even know about. Go on. So I don't know what that is. Various ghost hunters have analyzed it and tried to figure out what it could have been. We got nothing. I don't try to hold it up as proof of the paranormal or anything. If I did, you should absolutely not listen to me. It is in my direct financial interest to have this place be haunted. If I could I could have made a lot more hay out of that. You just have to take my word for it that I didn't fake it. If I was going to fake it, I'd have her say something a little more coherent, I suppose. I didn't hear anything while I was down there. I was really just whispering so I could just listen to a couple of seconds of listening and letting my mind play tricks on itself trying to hear something. So Holmes was convicted of just the murder of Benjamin Peitzel. That's the only one they could get to stick, at least in Philadelphia. Had he been acquitted, they would have expedited him to Toronto, or extradited him to Toronto, and then possibly to Irvington, where Alice and Nellie's brother was found dead. After exhausting all chances for a reprieve, Holmes took $7,500 and a joint payment from the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Herald, and the New York Journal, to write a confession. This was the New York World. The New York World did not get the confession. They tried to, so instead they just wrote a thing of themselves saying, Holmes has confessed. He is about to publish a thing saying that he has killed 20 people, including Patrick Quinlan, the janitor of the castle, who was well known to be alive and well at the time. But once they had said Holmes is going to confess to having killed 20 people, Holmes was kind of against a wall. He had to confess to more than 20 people or it would have been a letdown. So he confessed to having killed 27 people. His confession appeared in the Journal and the Inquirer. The Inquirer version is a little bit longer. There's one section of the Journal that's a bit longer than it appears in the Inquirer one. It is probably the most boring account of killing 27 people that has ever been written. That should be a grabber. The account of killing Howard Peitzel might be approximately how it happened. The rest of it, even when he's telling the truth about having killed somebody, he's lying about how he did it, as far as we know. Of the 27 people he mentions killing, several were still alive at the time. Others seem to have been fictional characters. A more realistic number is there's 9 that we can be pretty sure on, a 10th or 11th that are definitely in the maybe column. But it was debunked almost immediately. And one other thing to point out here, one of the weird little side characters you find in this is there was a judge named Yehu Amaziah Orr down south, down in Mississippi, who said that Mrs. Holmes and her daughter had come to give an affidavit saying that Holmes and Peitzel had killed a guy in Mississippi in 1894. Now, the name of the guy changes a little bit in the account. I don't know if the affidavit might still even be on file someplace, but nothing was ever done with it. Yehu Amaziah Orr went down in history himself. He was the last member of the Confederate Congress to die, which, to me, tells me he's not somebody we should pay any attention to at all. He's an unreliable source. We don't listen to terrorists around here, unless you can bring up the documents. But the New York World was not done yet. They were so mad about the confession that they started the story about Holmes's evil eye, claiming that Holmes had cursed everybody. This still goes around quite a bit, and in fact, it's part of what kept the story alive all those years. Every time somebody connected with the case died, newspapers had to bring up the story about the curse of H.H. Holmes. But they were actually starting that before Holmes was dead. He wasn't just cursing people from beyond the grave. But he was hanged in Philadelphia in May of 1896. Love the dude in front over there who's kind of spun around. Fuck, if that guy shaved, he'd look just like sickly Mitch McConnell or something. But Holmes, on the scaffold, he took back his confession and said it was really only Julia and Emmeline that he killed, both during abortions. By his own request, one of his lawyers arranged for him to be buried in a giant block of cement. He'd been getting an awful lot of requests to have people wanting to buy his skeleton either to experiment on or to put on display in a sideshow or something. Didn't like the sound of that, so Samuel Rotan, the attorney, arranged for him to be buried in this giant block of cement, which he assumed would keep him safe from grave robbers, not having thought about the awesome power of the History Channel. In 1898, 2 years after his death, a story went around that Holmes was not, in fact, hanged. A guy by the name of Robert Latimer said that he had seen some letters or some documents claiming that it wasn't really Holmes that was hanged at all. Robert Latimer had worked at the Castle building. Holmes had confessed to killing him, though he was in fact alive and well. This was probably based on a pamphlet that had been written called Hanged by Proxy by a guy named Mr. Warner, whom Holmes had also confessed to killing at one point. He claimed that he locked him up in a glass bending oven, L.W. Warner. He was alive and well and living in Newton, Iowa, and now writing pamphlets saying it was really some other dead guy with a mustache that they propped up on the scaffold, and by the time that happened, Holmes was already in New York, and now he and Minnie Williams are in San Paramaribo, South America, growing coffee for a living. San Paramaribo was not even a real place. This was debunked the very next day. A foolish fake story. But they were able to go in front of a judge a few years ago and get permission to dig him up. I was supposed to get to go with them, but then they just told me, oh, we're already here. I'm still a little bit pissed about that. But here's how he looked down there in all of that cement. And if you look closely here, you see there's the top of his skull. Down a little ways below is the lower jaw, way down, like he had been screaming or something. Very ghastly. And here he is, all cleaned up and showered, popping fresh. But they did some DNA tests and determined that, yes, in fact, it was him. But they didn't even really need to do that. There was this jaw cast that was made and published in the Journal of the American Medical Association after an examination by Dr. Eugene Talbot, and you could match the jaw cast to the skull easily. It was missing all of the right teeth. The right teeth were bent out of shape. It was really pretty cool to see. But I always kind of close on the Eugene Talbot thing, as Eugene Talbot's medical report is mostly about the bumps and ridges on his skull. There was one particular dent. In 1894, when Holmes showed back up in New Hampshire, he said, sorry, I've been gone for 6 years, but what happened is I got hit in the head with a brick and got amnesia. I just remembered who I am. And in the meantime, I married my nurse, Georgiana. Nobody quite bought this, but when he was in New Hampshire, he was like passing around money like hand over foot, so everybody just kind of went along with it. But buried in the report is also the bottom of this first paragraph. Sexual organs unusually small. So one more piece of the puzzle, perhaps. So, all right, when I quickly plug my upcoming stuff, that one's just been done. But Saturday, June 5th, I'm going to be traveling in New York and doing tours and stuff out there for most of the next week. But I'll be back in time for June 5th, assuming I don't get COVID and get quarantined while I'm out there, which is a distinct possibility right now. But I will be doing Prairie Avenue Splendor and Scandal. That is down on Prairie Avenue below 18th Street, all these Gilded Age millionaire mansions and lots of stories, some of which fairly gruesome and coming with cool, gory photos. Now, should you need a sweatshirt, t-shirt, or something for Mysterious Chicago, that's at cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. There's also an Effing Chicago one at cafepress.com/Effing Chicago. And with that, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me here at Effing Chicago. I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out for a while. So, all right, everybody, thanks a lot. Here's Benny. Who among us hasn't married her nurse? Well, Holmes. Georgiana was never actually his nurse. And that story got back to her, and she was like, what the hell? Congrats on retiring, Dana. Of course, we'll find Miles in a minute. All right, Karen. If you'd like to donate, Venmo is the best way to go. There's also the PayPal option over here. Your best bet is the Patreon. The Patreon, if you're on the H.H. Holmes tier, I put stuff from my H.H. Holmes collection once a week, some of which you can't get anywhere else. Thanks, Eleanor. Now, please do throw in. Yesterday, while I was having a cup of coffee, I got word that my rent's going up and that I owe the IRS a lot of money. It's the most expensive fucking cup of coffee of my life. Barbara, that report was done while Holmes was still alive. It was a result of a medical examination while he was in prison, and published just a couple of months later. I'll play some Taylor Swift for Karen. They think he did it, but they just can't prove it. Well, there's any number of ways to work in Last Great American Dynasty on the Prairie Avenue tour. Oh, hey, Gene. I will be with World Strides in New York next week. I was with him here yesterday. Oh yeah, and if you pay on the $20 tier, which has a few slots open, you get a tour ticket every month. And really, I'm not that picky about it. I'm not that careful about checking whether people actually have a tour, but you just send me a message if you want to come. You probably get to come. Oh yeah, Kara, this would be easy. We talk about George Pullman's No Good Sons. There goes the Last Great American Dynasty. They had a marvelous time ruining everything.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now,
and also, the cost of the $20 tier is now less than the cost of one ticket, especially with the Eventbrite fees. So, very good deal. Have a good night, Betsy. Yeah, if you're on the tour ticket tier and you want to come on a tour, just send me a message and come on out. It's also, you'll also get all the stuff below, so you get like 4 posts a week. Lots and lots of fun on the Patreon. I was digging up documents and on the guy I'm going to look for tomorrow on Find a Grave Friday. Pullman, I've been trying to find the source of your quote on that. Dana, I think so, yes. Just go to Patreon and like edit pledge or something. Yeah, Bob, don't get your leg tangled in your walker again. We're gonna work at that. You know, I think I may have found, I'm not totally sure, but I may have found a black Civil War soldier in Oak Woods who was a Pullman porter. Ah, David, that's a good word. That's a good way to put it. I love that. I got next week's post already typed up in advance, since I'll be out of town. Me being out of town doesn't stop the Patreon. Evening, Robert. Hate to break it to anybody who just checked in, but it was 8 o'clock Central Time, so we're actually in the post-tour hangout now. I'm sipping the remains of my cocktail The Two Doors Down. I'm copying from a place in New York that appears on the Grave Robbing 101 tour there. Oh, and of course, tomorrow night, Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page. 6:30, Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. And often I make prank phone calls to public officials. The mayor in Texas, who was playing cowboy, yelling at Beta, "You'll 6-0, man!" Sounded like he spawned on the floor of a white-only restroom someplace. His mailbox is full. What kind of veggies are in your burrito, Phoenix? Let me go find Miles. Miles? Oh, there you are. Come on, Miles. You're contractually obligated. Thanks, Eleanor. Oh, and guys, if you're paying on PayPal, if there's a button to push to make it a personal donation, not a good or service, I'd appreciate that.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Miles, aw. See, now I've woken him up. I deserve what I'm getting now. Hey, have a good night, Karen. It was like a gold evening from here, a solid gold evening. Yeah, Gene, that's it. Yeah, plus interest and fees. I should really come up with a recipe for sorry beefalo, but who would eat it? Like beef basted in Malort or something. That guy. Miles is shedding like crazy. Good night, Susan. Hot chocolate sounds good. You know, I just found out the place that makes Malort marshmallows is moving from Rogers Park to Lincoln Park. They're moving on up. Miles, don't knock that over. Miles, you got a whole scratcher if you want to just scratch your face on something. I know you love face scratches. And my brother sends me a picture every time he finds Malort in L.A. I don't know if he's ever actually bought any of it.
We stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
Yeah, XO Marshmallows, Joanne. It's a fancy marshmallow shop. Oh, Miles, you just knocked down my phone. It's okay, you didn't break it. Alright, Mandy announces that despite passengers on her last tour coming down, the school tour coming down with COVID, she tested negative. Alright. Catch your troubles by the toe. If it hollers, let it go. Let it fly away. Remember when Miles was small enough to go riding in paper bags? You can't do that anymore, can you, Miles? Oh yeah, the numbers are going back up. I refrained from going to the theaters with the groups right now. I'll probably refrain. My group is going to see Dear Evan Hansen in New York. I'll probably just skip it, just to be safe. Also, because that show sucks so hard. Now, the germy kids are a problem anyway. I mean, they're bringing in a whole bus full of germs that I have no immunity to from some other part of the country. I about live on airborne during those things. So, you know, it's not like I get proper vitamins on tour anyway. Yeah. Last time you tried that, even a double bagged one, you just break it now.
Presenting Madhouse.
Yeah, Dear Evan Hansen is basically a young adult novel in Broadway musical form, and having written them enough, I know all its tricks. I know your tricks and manners. I need more booze. What I got here? Even a Z31 kind of night. It is a cognac kind of night. Here's some Jepson's. Besides Malort, Jepson's also makes some of the best bourbon in the business. This is one of their ones finished in a cognac cask. 118 proof. Let's have a little bit of this. This is Miles playing the piano here. Good night, Bob. Good night, Kristen. I even had a kid on my tour yesterday, had to go home as he started coughing too much. He hadn't been around me, so. And several kids have dropped out of my upcoming one. I can kind of guess why. Well, yeah, I've been pretty hardcore with masking.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
All right. Here'll be Benny wrapping up. I'll leave these up a little bit longer, because there might be some new effing people here. Good night, Kristen. I'll see you soon. And Chicago is a lot less masking now than we had a couple of months ago, but still pretty good. I'm glad to have you back, Barbie. Another quick plug. We're coming up in person June 5th. Tickets are on sale now at adamchicago.com. Prairie Avenue, Splendor and Scandal. It's what I've only done in person a couple of times, but I think we're just about there on it. I've been spending the last couple of days putting new ones together. Tomorrow I'm going to be working at Oak Woods a little bit, getting ready to do a walking tour there at some point. So everybody, thank you very much for joining me. I am Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. And effing Chicago Tours tonight, saying stay safe, stay strong, and stay effing spooky. Good night, everybody.